and fight it. That's the part people never understand. When my parents sat me down the summer before my freshman year and told me they weren't paying for my college, not a single dollar, not a co-signed loan, nothing, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat there at the kitchen table with my hands folded in my lap and I looked at them and I said, "Okay." Just that. Okay. My mother looked almost disappointed that I didn't argue. I was 18. I had acceptance letter from the University of Michigan sitting on my desk upstairs, tucked under my journal because I didn't want to look at it anymore. I had a 3.9 GPA. I had letters of recommendation from 3 teachers who wrote things like rare intellectual curiosity and exceptional potential. None of that mattered. What mattered, apparently, was that I was the older one, the one who was strong enough to figure it out. That's what my father said, word for word. "You're strong, Vivian, you'll figure it out." He said it the same way someone compliments a racehorse before they run it into the ground. My brother was 14 at the time, sitting across the table from me, eating a bowl of cereal like none of this was happening. He was 14, and I already knew, already understood in the way you know things you don't want to know, that when his time came, the conversation would be completely different, that my parents would suddenly find money they didn't have when it was his name on the acceptance letter. I wasn't wrong, but I'll get to that. What I did was practical. I had about 6 weeks before the semester started and exactly $847 in my savings account from 2 years of babysitting and 1 summer working the register at a garden center. I called the University of Michigan financial aid office the next morning and spent 2 hours on the phone going through every option. They were kind. They were also honest. At my parents' income level, I didn't qualify for much need-based aid. I would need their tax information to appeal the decision. And when I asked my father for it, he looked at me across the dinner table and said, "We don't want to be involved in that process." So I deferred. I took a gap year I hadn't planned and didn't want, and I worked 3 jobs. I was a barista from 5 in the morning until noon, a grocery stocker 3 evenings a week, and on weekends I tutored high school kids in math and chemistry. I kept a spreadsheet. Every dollar in, every dollar out. I cut nothing because there was nothing to cut. I was living at home, sleeping in my childhood bedroom, eating whatever my mother made for dinner, and trying not to feel like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. By spring, I had enough to cover my first semester's tuition and housing if I was careful. I applied to every scholarship I could find. I got 3 small ones and 1 medium-sized one from a local professional organization for women in STEM. It wasn't enough to be comfortable, it was enough to go. I left in August. I packed my car, a 2004 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door that I had bought for $3,200 the previous October, and my mother came outside and stood on the front steps. She didn't help me carry boxes. She watched me load everything I owned into that car, and at some point she said, "You know you could have just gone to community college." I didn't answer. I put the last box in the back seat, closed the door, and hugged her because she was my mother, and despite everything, she was my mother. And despite everything, she was my mother. She patted my shoulder blade twice, like I was someone she barely knew. My father shook my hand. I drove 4 hours to Ann Arbor with the windows down because the air conditioning didn't work, and somewhere on I-94 I started crying and didn't stop for about 40 minutes. Not because I was sad, because I was free, and I wasn't ready for how physical that feeling would be. College was hard in the way that anything is hard when you're doing it with one hand tied behind your back. I worked part-time throughout all 4 years. I had a work-study placement my first 2 years, 15 hours a week in the chemistry department, washing equipment, and organizing storage. It wasn't glamorous. I ate a lot of peanut butter. I wore the same 3 pairs of jeans for 2 years, until one pair developed a hole that couldn't be explained away anymore. I had a meal plan my first year, and then I didn't. And I learned to cook in a tiny apartment kitchen with 2 roommates who became 2 of my closest friends. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving sophomore year. My roommate Jess invited me to her family's place in Ohio, and I went, and I sat at her family's table surrounded by noise and chaos and people arguing about football, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized had been clenched for months. I called my mother on Thanksgiving morning from Jess's family's driveway, breath fogging in the cold air. She asked me how school was going. I told her fine. She told me my brother had joined the junior varsity soccer team. I said that was great. We talked for 8 minutes and then she said she had to go check on the turkey and we hung up. I stood there in the driveway for a little while after, looking at nothing. I majored in biochemistry. I had no idea what I was going to do with it at first. I just knew I was good at it, and I had learned by then to follow what I was good at, rather than waiting for someone else's permission to be ambitious. I took a research elective my junior year and ended up working in a lab studying protein folding. My supervisor, a professor named Dr. Sikariam Okafor, who had the energy of someone who genuinely could not believe how interesting the universe was, told me at the end of that semester that I should think seriously about medical school. I started thinking seriously about medical school. I applied in my senior year. I had a 3.87 GPA and a strong research background and MCAT scores that I had studied for in the corner of a coffee shop over 6 months of early Saturday mornings. I got interviews at 4 schools. I got into 2. I chose the one in Philadelphia because it offered me a scholarship that covered 60% of tuition, and I had learned that money is not abstract, it is the thing that lets you keep going. I want to tell you something about those years. The medical school years. They were the hardest thing I have ever done. They were also the first time in my life I stopped feeling like I was compensating for something. Like I was always working twice as hard just to arrive at a starting line everyone else had already crossed. Medical school was hard for everyone. The playing field wasn't even. It's never even. But the particular exhaustion of being the person who paid for everything herself, who had no safety net, who was one unexpected car repair away from a very bad month. That was a weight I had carried so long I had stopped noticing it. I noticed it lifting. I did my residency in internal medicine at a hospital in Philadelphia. I stayed in the city. I built a life there, a small apartment I loved, a group of colleagues who became friends, a running habit that I took up out of desperation during my intern year and genuinely came to rely on. I met someone during my second year of residency, a structural engineer named Aaron, who made me laugh in a way that felt like exhaling. We dated for 2 years, and then he asked me to marry him in the kitchen of my apartment on a Tuesday night while I was making pasta, and he was supposedly loading the dishwasher. I said yes. I was 31. I had a medical degree. A research paper with my name on it in a journal I had read as an undergraduate, a life that I had assembled piece by careful piece, and I was getting married to someone who thought I was extraordinary. I had not spoken to my parents in about 2 years. The silence between us hadn't happened all at once. That's not how it works with family. It's slower than that. It's canceling a phone call and not rescheduling it, and then the next one, and then you realize it's been 3 months and neither of you has reached out, and you're not sure if that's a rupture or just the natural conclusion of something that was already ending. The thing that actually ended it was my brother's college situation. He was 17 when I found out. My aunt, my mother's younger sister, who had always been more honest with me than anyone else in that family, called me one evening during my first year of residency and mentioned, conversationally, that my parents were helping my brother look at universities, that they had found a financial advisor, that my father had moved some money around in a retirement account to make sure they could contribute to tuition without it being a financial burden. I sat with that for a long time. I want to be precise about what I felt, because I have thought about it a lot since. It wasn't that I begrudged my brother the help. He was my brother. I loved him in the background way you love a sibling you grew up alongside, a constant low hum of affection even when you're not in the same room. I didn't want him to go through what I had gone through. I genuinely didn't. What I felt was something colder and more specific than jealousy. It was the recognition that my parents had made a choice, had made it deliberately, had dressed it up in language about independence and strength, and had always known they were making it. "You're strong enough to figure it out" was not a compliment. It was a decision they had already made before they sat down at that table, before I even had a chance to react. I called my mother. I told her what my aunt had told me. I didn't yell. I asked one question. "Did you always know you were going to do this?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We just thought it would be better for you to learn self-reliance early." "And not him? He's different." I said I understood. I said goodbye. I didn't call again, and neither did she, and that was the end of that chapter. Aaron and I got married on a Saturday in September 2 years after he proposed in the kitchen. It was a small wedding, 80 people, a venue in the Philadelphia countryside, a caterer who made the best crab cakes I have ever eaten in my life, Jess was my maid of honor. Dr. Contriditing, in my life. Okafor came and danced enthusiastically to every song regardless of tempo. Aaron's family was warm and chaotic, and immediately treated me like someone who had always been there. I did not invite my parents. I thought about it. I want to be honest about that. I thought about it more than once, in the months before the wedding. In the quiet hours after Aaron had fallen asleep and I was lying there going over the logistics of my own life. I thought about what it would mean to have them there. What it would feel like to have my mother stand in a room where I was the one being celebrated, the one whose choices had led somewhere, and to have her witness that without being able to revise the narrative. I decided it would not be good for me. That's the whole reason. It would not be good for me, and I was no longer willing to make choices that were bad for me in order to preserve a relationship that had only ever asked that of me in one direction. I did invite my aunt. She came, she cried during the ceremony. She hugged me for a long time afterward and didn't say anything, and that was the right thing to do. 3 weeks after the wedding, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was my brother. He was 26 by then. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year, hadn't seen him in 3. He had gotten my number from our aunt, he explained, and he hoped it was okay that he was calling. His voice was the same, a little lower than I remembered, a little more careful, like he had learned to be deliberate with his words in a way that he hadn't been as a kid. He said, "I owe you a conversation." I sat down on my couch. Aaron was out. The apartment was quiet. I said, "Okay." He told me he had known for a long time that what our parents had done was not fair. He had known in the specific way that the person who benefits from an unfair system always knows, even if they tell themselves otherwise. He had used the money they gave him, had gone to college, had graduated, was working now as an accountant in Seattle. And he had thought for years that the right thing to do was stay out of it. That it wasn't his place to say anything. I was wrong about that, he said. I think I told myself it wasn't my responsibility because I didn't want it to be. I didn't say anything. He kept going. He told me that he had confronted our parents about it the previous Christmas, that he had sat down with them and said what he had been not saying for years, that our mother had cried and our father had gotten quiet, and neither of them had apologized exactly, but something had shifted. He said our mother had been asking about me, that she had found out about the wedding through our aunt, and that she had not reacted the way he expected, that she had sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she and my father had told me to figure it out. And she had cried for a long time without saying anything. I don't know if that means anything to you, he said. I'm not calling to ask you to forgive them. I just thought you should know. I stared at the wall of my apartment for a moment. Outside I could hear traffic. Someone honking twice, a city noise, ordinary life continuing. I appreciate you telling me, I said. I mean that. We talked for another hour. About his job, about Aaron, about the city, about small things. It felt careful and new, like learning to walk on ice. You can do it, but you have to pay attention. We started talking regularly after that. Once every couple of weeks. Then, once a week. He came to Philadelphia to visit once, and Aaron and I took him to dinner, and it was almost normal. A little awkward in the way things are when you're rebuilding from scratch, but almost normal. My parents called 8 months after that. It was my mother who dialed. My father was on the line too, but she did the talking. She sounded older. That's the first thing I noticed. Not in a bad way, just different. Like the voice of someone who has spent some time sitting with something heavy. She did not start with an apology. She started with, "I'd been thinking about what to say for a long time." I let her talk. I had decided before I answered that I would let her talk without interrupting, and then I would decide what I thought. She said she didn't know how to explain why they had done what they did, not in a way that would make sense to me. She said that when she was growing up, the expectation in her family was that daughters got married and sons built careers, and she had absorbed that so completely that she hadn't even recognized it as a belief. She had thought it was just the way things were. She said that watching me build everything myself and watching my brother receive every advantage and still struggle in ways she hadn't expected had done something to the certainty she'd always had. "I'm not asking you to forget," she said. "I know that's not how it works." "No," I agreed. "It's not. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. What we did. I see it." I was quiet for a moment. Aaron was in the kitchen. I could hear him, the sound of someone else's life intersecting with mine. I hear you, I said finally. I need some time. She said she understood. My father cleared his throat and said, "We're proud of you, Vivian." It was stiff. It landed a little oddly, like a word in a foreign language pronounced almost right. But he meant it. I could tell he meant it. We got off the phone. I sat there for a few minutes, not moving. Aaron came to the doorway and looked at me. I looked back at him. "My parents called," I said. "Yeah?" He didn't push. "I think I might need about a week to figure out how I feel about that." He nodded. He went back to the kitchen. A little while later, he brought me a cup of tea without being asked and sat down next to me and didn't say anything, and that was exactly right. I'm not going to tell you I've forgiven them. That's not the story. Forgiveness is a longer road than a phone call. Longer than 8 months. Longer maybe than I can see from where I'm standing right now. What I will tell you is that I'm a doctor. I have a husband who brought me tea without being asked. I have a brother I'm slowly getting to know as an adult. I have an apartment in a city I chose. A career I built out of spite and curiosity in roughly equal measures. And mornings when I wake up and look at the life around me and think, I made this. Without anyone's help, without a safety net, without anyone's help, without a safety net, without anyone telling me I was strong enough. I know I'm strong enough. I proved that to myself when I was 18 years old, with $847 and a dented Honda Civic and 4 hours of highway ahead of me. My mother wanted me to learn self-reliance early. She got what she asked for. I'm just not sure, sitting here now, whether she expected this to be what it looked like. I've thought a lot about the word strong. My parents used it like a gift the morning they told me I was on my own. You're strong, Vivian. You'll figure it out. And for years I carried that word like it was something they'd given me, when really it was something they'd required of me because it was more convenient than being fair. Here's what I actually believe now. On the other side of all of it, strength isn't something you're born with, or something a parent grants you by withdrawing their support. It's something that gets built slowly, out of necessity and choice and the decision to keep going on the days when keeping going feels genuinely unreasonable. I built mine in a coffee shop on early Saturday mornings with an MCAT prep book and a medium drip I could barely afford. I built it in a lab washing equipment at $15 an hour. I built it on I-94 with the windows down and tiers I didn't expect, somewhere between the life I came from and the one I was driving toward. None of that was a gift, but it became mine in a way that nothing handed to me ever could have been. What happened to my family? The distance? The silence? My brother's eventual reckoning with his own conscience? My mother sitting at that kitchen table crying over something she couldn't name for years? None of it was punishment. I don't believe in that kind of arithmetic. What I believe is that the choices we make shape who we become, and they also shape the relationships we're left with. My parents made a choice when I was 18, and they spent 10 years living with the version of their family that choice created. A daughter who wasn't at the table. A son who knew, somewhere quiet in himself, that the arrangement wasn't right. My brother calling me took courage. I want to say that plainly. It would have been easier for him to stay comfortable in the silence, to tell himself it wasn't his place, to let things remain the way they were. He didn't. That decision, to pick up the phone, to say I was wrong about that, is the reason we have something now. Not everything, not the childhood we could have had, but something real that we're both willing to tend to. And my mother's call. I'm still figuring out what to do with that. What I know is that I don't owe anyone my forgiveness on a timeline that works for them. What I also know is that holding on to anger at the expense of my own peace is just another way of letting someone else's choices cost me something. I'm not willing to pay that price anymore. I worked 3 jobs at 18. I graduated medical school. I married someone who brings me tea without being asked. I built a life that is genuinely, solidly mine. Vivian turned out fine. Not because of what her parents did. In spite of it, and with a clarity about what actually matters that I'm not sure I would have found any other way. That's not a justification for what they did. It's just the truth of where I ended up. And I'll take it.